Welcome to episode 3 of the ASEAN Dx Preparedness webinar series, a learning and networking platform for diagnostics researchers, users, and practitioners in ASEAN. When we first started the ASEAN Dx Preparedness series, we were talking about innovative tests, testing tools that can help labs and public health agencies deal with mass testing for more efficient detection and contact tracing management. Now, almost 5 months later, we're still testing, but the world has now arrived at the crossroad of going in the direction of managing COVID-19 as an endemic disease. Of course, we're only able to do that and contemplate this possibility because of COVID-19 vaccines. Understanding the effect of vaccines by measuring the serology response is a scalable way to help navigate our journey forward collectively. Today, our topic is exactly on that, vaccines and immunity. With the vaccine breakthrough infections, should we be looking at vaccine passport or immunity passport in the endemic phase? When can we achieve herd immunity? These are some of the points that we will be discussing later. Very much looking forward to the panel discussions later. Today's session also has a very special significance, as we will discuss the science and purpose of the first multilateral collaboration to study the immune response of vaccines across ASEAN. We're honored to have with us the principal investigators from 6 ASEAN member states that are part of the study. The ASEAN Serosurveillance Study was first initiated at the 78th ASEAN Committee of Science, Technology and Innovations, or COSTI meeting, which was organized and chaired by A*STAR Singapore. ASEAN Dx Initiative coordinated the study, and we're grateful that it has since been endorsed and supported by ASEAN COSTI, as well as partnered by Temasek Foundation. We've received tremendous support from scientists and clinicians in the region who want to contribute to the study. I'm very humbled by the camaraderie observed and very enthused by the curiosity among ASEAN scientific community to want to learn, share, and grow for the good of public health as a region. We have a packed program today, so without further delay, let me invite Mr. Benedict Cheong, Chief Executive of Temasek Foundation International. Temasek Foundation shares the same vision in contributing to capacity building in peacetime, and even more so in difficult times, and believes in the values of building a borderless scientific community based on collaboration. In this pandemic, Temasek Foundation has been very active in supporting multiple COVID-19 initiatives globally. We're honored to be a partner with them in this study. Benedict, please.
Thank you, Sydney. I bring warm greetings from Singapore to first our distinguished panelists, leaders, and of course to all of you distinguished participants. You are leaders, professors, specialists in your respective communities, your respective fields of work, and I would like to bring warm greetings from us as the Temasek Foundation and DXD and DukeNUS Singapore to all of you. First, give me a few, maybe 1 or 2 minutes to share a bit about what Temasek Foundation is all about. I think many of you know the name of Temasek. This is an investment company headquartered in Singapore. So in 2007, Temasek set up Temasek Foundation, and our work was primarily in the region. First, to foster international exchange and to enhance regional capabilities. We then extended the work back into Singapore and then later into the field of science and sustainability. We have done several programs in Asia across in the areas of education, healthcare, public sector leadership, urban management, and so on. And we've lately added on crisis response as one of our areas of focus. Of course, the idea is to build capability and capacity together, and also to promote this dialogue and exchange that can lead to mutual collaborations and ultimately to mutual trust. If you ask me why Temasek Foundation is doing all this, well, perhaps we can go back to the basic principle or basic thesis of what Temasek Foundation in our international work, what we like to believe in And this is our belief, right? That as communities in Asia develop, we must develop together. One community developing well will lead to others also developing well and prospering. So it is a prosper your neighbor sort of idea that we have taken on board in terms of the way we shape our programs, the way we work with partners. Flip it around and you look at what we're going through in the pandemic today. And we say, okay, no one is safe until everyone is safe. So if you look at both sets of principles or theses, you find that perhaps they are opposite ends, opposite sides of the same coin. So this is what we are all about. That's why we are supporting this program. But let me zero in to the crisis response work that we are trying to do. We coined this phrase disease X or crisis X. Now, I was sharing earlier on with the panelists and yesterday as well in conversations. Are we able to extrapolate the lessons from today's pandemic, the current pandemic, into the future to prepare ourselves for the next disease, the next pandemic, the next illness that's going to hit us in the region or in the world? Well, the answer to me is yes and no. Yes, we can learn many things from what we're doing today, and the science can be developed, and we can have good results, good assessments. But I think when we talk about disease X, we must always allow for a degree of uncertainty, a degree of the unknown unknowns, and we have to factor in as many possible scenarios as possible. We've got to put in the variations, the twists and turns, if I can say it that way, so that we can cover some of the other possibilities that a disease or crisis X might take. So this is one thing that we think we need to look at. The second thing is, why are we supporting this program in particular, serosurveillance, and for that matter, bringing together leaders, specialists, scientists, professors, such as all of you, together into the same platform? And our thinking at this moment, and we share this we have recently concluded the ASEAN Ministerial Special Meeting where we discuss again crisis X and disease X and the need for collaboration. And one of the elements that's coming through is this idea that we need to build the networks quickly and now if we are to prepare for the next crisis and the next disease. We are talking about networks of exchange, of collaboration, of understanding between individuals, such as all of you, and institutions that you represent, so that when we build this over time, there's a certain level of comfort we achieve in working with each other, and I'm going to say this, exchanging data, exchanging insights and experiences, and dare I say, exchanging samples, even samples in our research with each other. We are so comfortable doing that so that we promote the science together, we promote research together and get results together towards the combined and aligned objective of making the ASEAN community and maybe the larger Asian community safer for the next crisis. So we have to, this is our belief, that's why this is a start. This is the first of perhaps a series of platforms you want to create and support so that we can start to build this mutual understanding, mutual exchange, and mutual trust among the people whom we believe are going to lead us into and out of the next crisis. So this is what we are trying to do, and I want to thank DukeNUS, I want to thank DXD, and all of you participants for putting your time and effort into this. It is probably a no-brainer to say this, that the success of this webinar, the success of the series of platforms that we are going to support in this whole area is going to depend on all the participation that we can bring in. Every one of you will have insights to share. Every one of you will have experiences and the twists and turns that you have encountered in your research and in your other work. So this is so important, and that's why I want to thank all of you for your active participation. So it leaves me now to just quickly wish all of you very happy dialogue and learning from each other. Push the frontiers together, ask the difficult questions, and share your insights. And of course, do stay safe in your respective communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedict. Indeed, having the community to learn, share, and grow together is critical as a region when we move forward together. I would like now to introduce my co-chair on the ASEAN Dx Initiative, Dr. Jamie Montoya, to give an overview of the ASEAN Serosurveillance Study. Jamie is sharing this through a video. Jamie, please.
COVID-19 vaccinations are gaining more ground in the ASEAN region, despite its global supply issue. However, we are still in the race against time, as a surge of cases in the region have been observed due to the presence of more infectious variants. One of the challenges we are now facing is to whether the vaccines that have been given are still effective and how long their protection will be. This is the purpose of the ASEAN Serosurveillance Study, to determine the state of immunity of our populations in the ASEAN region before and after vaccination, monitor the rate of seroconversion of neutralizing antibodies, evaluate the half-life of the vaccines post-vaccination, and provide data on breakthrough infections. The scientific data are crucial to our policy and decision makers in order to curtail the further spread of the virus that changed the lives of everyone. Led by the ASEAN Diagnostic Initiative, which is co-chaired by Singapore and the Philippines, we are currently in the preparation for the commencement activities to gather data and to produce publishable reports on immunity levels of the ASEAN populations. At present, 6 ASEAN countries are now on board on the project, and we are still engaging the remaining member states to collaborate in this study. The road to herd immunity is a long and arduous one, as we are not only trying to prevent the spread of the virus and its mutations into more infectious and more lethal strains, but also ensuring that our efforts to control and somehow coexist with this infection are not hindered by our issues in supply and the possibility of limited protection that the current available vaccines can provide. But achieving herd immunity, not only in the ASEAN region, but all over the world, is not impossible, and the journey will be less burdensome if we can get more experts from our neighboring regions to work with us sooner. Fostering and strengthening partnerships in the scientific, healthcare, and public service sectors in the ASEAN region through collaboration, such as in this project, will help accelerate and expedite the adoption of innovative and cost-effective preventive and diagnostic solutions for our people. It is our fervent hope that once the results of the serosurveillance study of the ASEAN region have been published, it can add to the pool of the world's knowledge on seroconversion and pre-existing cross-immunity, and be useful for other countries in formulating solutions to achieving herd immunity in the near future. Through Professor Wang Linfa's presentation, we will learn how far along we have come in our efforts towards achieving herd immunity, and I am hoping that this will spark a robust discussion on different avenues and approaches that we could explore to move forward in one ASEAN community. As a co-lead, I appreciate your presence and welcome everyone. Also, allow me to give my heartfelt thanks to my colleagues in the ASEAN Diagnostic Initiative, Dr. Sidney Yee of the Diagnostics Development Hub, Singapore, our moderator, Dr. Benedict Yan of the Molecular Diagnostics Center of the National University Health System, Singapore, our resource persons, Professor Wang Linfa of the DukeNUS Medical School, Singapore, Dr. Christine de la Cruz of the Research Institute of Tropical Medicine, Philippines, Dr. Safarina Gualtiani Malik of the Eichmann Institute, Indonesia, Dr. Watsamon Jantarabenjakul of the King Chulalongkorn Memorial Hospital, Thailand, Associate Professor Chan Yokipan of the University of Malaya, Malaysia, Associate Professor Tan Lee Van of the Oxford University Clinical Research Unit, Vietnam, and those who are here from the scientific, medical, and academic communities. Again, good morning to everyone, and I wish all of us a fruitful webinar.
Thank you, Jamie. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Dr. Benedict Yen to chair and moderate the plenary and the discussion later today. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sydney. A warm welcome, everyone. I will now briefly introduce our speaker, Professor Wang Linfa. Prof. Wang is a professor in the program in Emerging Infectious Diseases at DukeNUS Medical School, Singapore, and one of the world's leading experts in pathogen discovery. He is an erudite scientist. He has published extensively in many top journals, received numerous international awards, and has multiple high-level appointments, including serving on the WHO's International Health Regulations Emergency Committee for the ongoing COVID-19 outbreak. Let me now hand the screen over to Professor Wang Linfa for his talk titled Vaccine and Immunity. When can we achieve herd immunity? Prof. Wang Linfa, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. And let's just get into the slideshow mode. All okay with you? You can see?
Not
Yeah,
yet.
we can't. Yeah, not yet.
Not yet. Oh, that's interesting. Can you see the slides now?
No.
So let me do it again then and share. That's interesting, right? We have done this so many times. Okay, I'll get out first and do it again. Do I just have the share rights or why I'm the... Okay, so
no, yeah, we got it now.
Okay, so I think Ian Lu is helping me. Okay, so yeah, so the topic today is on the theme of vaccine immunity, and the question we want to ask is when can we achieve herd immunity? And next slide, please. Yeah, so try to define what is immunity and protect immunity and what is herd immunity. And then the question, why are the current vaccines not as effective as we expect or wished? And then booster vaccine right now is a hot topic, but I try to differentiate between quantitative boosting versus qualitative boosting. And that also the broad spectrum neutralizing antibodies to really demonstrate that what's the best, what we call a super immunity. And then can we develop a vaccine strategy now can really fight the current SARS-CoV-2 and the known and unknown variants, and then also have a very ambitious goal, try to prevent the future disease X, and we think it could be a SARS-3, you know. And so immunity that is defined as a complex biology system that can recognize and tolerate belongs to yourself, and then can fight and reject what's foreign. So that's the very broad definition of immunity. And then in this context, when we talk about immunity, we most refer to our ability to fight off infection or harmful microorganisms. Our adapt immunity, you know, the thing that pathogen-specific immune response are divided into two major arms. One is humoral immunity and one cell-mediated. And what we also can call antibody-mediated versus, you know, T-cell. A lot of debate about which one is more important. And I think, you know, scientifically that both are important. Antibodies and T-cells play an important role. But if you zoom in to is that you're talking about prevent disease or infection, so both are very important to in control and prevent disease. But in terms of prevent infection, the initial event of the, a virus replication and entering the cell, antibodies are more important. And then antibodies can act as soon as your virus enter the body and make a contact with the cell, whereas the T cell activation can only happen when the virus is already replicating. Protective immunity is, depends on what context you're talking about, what you try to protect against, right? Of course, the ultimate, the most deadly is death for any infection. So we definitely, any vaccine will have to be able to protect that. Then it'll be good. We can also protect severe disease so that we don't need to go to hospital to see the doctor. The next level is any disease, right? Fever or sore throat. Transmission. So even if it's asymptomatic, that's the biggest lesson I think personally and our scientific committee learned about COVID-19 is that you can transmit without display symptom, the asymptomatic infection transmission. And then the infection, even if you're infected without transmission, So we're talking about 5 different levels of protection. And sometimes you get confused or the media or the report does not distinguish. But it's very important to differentiate between what protect immunity you're talking about. And then the correlates of protect immunity is another highly, highly complex, First, you need to define what to protect. Secondly, how do you measure the correlates? So over the history of vaccine development, the correlates protections are always being debated and difficult to really, agree what's the best. So it goes from visual observation, if you're doing smallpox vaccine to say if you have a skin reaction, then you say there's some correlation that your immune system is working, to mostly now, we believe that serology. That's why it's very pertinent we are having this ASEAN collaboration, because this is still the best and the most programmatic, practical correlate protection that we can follow. And then today's topic is herd immunity. It's the buzzword, we all wish to achieve herd immunity. From day one, there'll be discussion about, are we going to achieve a herd immunity and how can we achieve a herd immunity, right? So the herd immunity by definition is basically at the population level. When you achieve a herd immunity, basically you don't have to worry as an individual because your chance of getting infection from another infected person is very low, okay? And that can be achieved through 2 different means, vaccination or natural infection. In certain countries at the early stage of the pandemic, they tried to see, can we achieve herd immunity just by natural infection? And obviously, in this day and age, when you have the technology, when you have the vaccine already on the horizon, ethically, I think that's just not right. And WHO strongly basically declared that they support only achieve herd immunity through vaccination and not by natural disease spread. So what is a herd immunity? There's a very simple formula, 1 minus 1 over R naught. So R naught is what we call a reproduction number. Just the average number that any people get infected can transmit that disease to another person, basically. So obviously, R naught is a highly, highly important. You look at from SARS-1 to SARS-2 now. Why we're in trouble is all because the R naught is a greater for SARS-2 than SARS-1. So just give you an example, in terms of human viral infectious diseases, measles is among the top of the ladder in terms of R naught. So the measles typically have an R naught around 12 to 18. So 1 person infected can on average pass at least to 12 individuals. So to achieve a herd immunity, you need a 92 to 94% of the population either infected or vaccinated. Now, closer to where we are right now, as you all know that, the pandemic has entered the 2nd phase. We call this the Delta pandemic. The Delta, the variant changed the dynamics a lot because the R naught. So the Delta R naught is averaging around 5 to 9. And it means that to achieve a herd immunity, we want to 80% or 89% of people immunized, either through vaccination or infection. But as I already said, what that means when you're immunized, when the herd immunity has been reached at 80%. The same kind of list. To me, that if you have a herd immunity in terms of protecting against deaths to reach 80 to 90%, then it's easy, right? Because our vaccine efficacy against deaths and a severe disease, no matter which vaccine you use, are in the 90s, 80s, right? But when you talk about herd immunity, what we want is to achieve the herd immunity at that level to be protective against transmission. So that's where the difficulty we're facing. We know our vaccines are very effective against severe disease and deaths. We thought was effective against transmission in the phase 3 trial, which was the case, but then there's two things really comes in, So the neutralizing antibodies, as I said, is the one that we can measure. And through neutralizing antibody, we can ask the question of the protection in terms of longevity. And we also can ask the question of protection in terms of specificity, the sensitivity to the mutation or the variants of the virus. So in the previous symposium of this episode, I have expended a lot of time to describe neutralizing antibody and how we measure it. So I'm going to go through relatively quickly. I think more and more that we all agree it's a very good correlative protection and it can be measured on a larger scale. So that kind of make neutralizing antibody attractive to do the surveillance that we try to do in the ASEAN network. And neutralizing antibody are highly predictive, for protection. And again, I'm going to go through the data just to, show this paper. And so these are the neutralizing antibody on the x-axis, and they define one for the convalescent sero from COVID-19 recovered patients. And then it goes higher, for the vaccinated, individuals, and the mRNA usually give you better, but protein subunit also gave you a very high neutralizing antibody, and can be good 2 to 4-fold higher than the convalescent sera. And then certain vaccines like the adeno and the inactive vaccines give you 2 to 4-fold of lower of neutralizing antibodies. On the y-axis basically says the neutralizing antibody has a direct correlation with protection. This is against disease. And then traditionally we had to measure neutralizing antibodies, using live virus, and it's tedious and it's expensive and need a skilled staff. But it's the gold standard because it's highly specific. So early on in the previous talk, I already said we developed and invented this surrogate virus neutralization. Just for those new in the audience, a surrogate virus neutralization is a biochemical simulation. So the diagram, in panel A is the traditional neutralization. The whole virus you incubate with sera. If you have neutralizing antibody, it blocks the interaction with the receptor and then prevent the cell death. In the surrogate virus neutralization, we use protein engineering to express and purify the receptor binding domain to mimic the virus. And then for the whole cells, we just express the ACE2 receptor and put on the ELISA plate. So that was a very effective and it was commercialized and FDA approved. Recently, we had made an improvement. Now we have a multiplex surrogate virus neutralization. Basically, we put the RBD now onto different magnetic beads. So this will allow us to do the original virus, the variant alpha, beta. We can do SARS-1, SARS-2, and the beta virus, pangolin virus, and so on. So that with this now we can really do a multiplex, do 10, 20 neutralization in one go, and we still just use 5 microliter of serum. We strategically selected RBDs from different viruses, so from SARS-1, in the shaded area, and the SARS-2 in the non-shaded area. So we call clade-1 and clade-2 viruses. One thing why we are in today with the Delta sort of pandemic is that we learned that for COVID-19 infection or vaccination, the neutralizing antibody your body produces is highly virus or strain specific. So very early on, we asked the question, for countries and cities that unfortunately was affected by SARS-1 coronavirus, that we went to the survivors of these people infected by SARS-1 17 years ago, asked, do they still have a neutralizing antibody against SARS-1 in their sera? If they do they cross-neutralize SARS-2? The good news is they still have a neutralizing antibody 17 years later. The bad news is they don't cross-neutralize with SARS-2. Since then, we have expressed the receptor binding domain from different viruses. This on top, SARS-CoV-2, the bat virus, pangolin virus, all the way to SARS-1 and the HKU1, which is a beta coronavirus, but not SARS-related as a negative control. And then we use this multiplex surrogate virus neutralization run determine neutral antibody against the 10 virus. I don't know, you cannot read the small writing SARS-CoV-2 to SARS-CoV-1 and everything in between. Without going through the data too much detail, it's clear that the best neutralization is against the homologous virus. Like the second panel, you look at the bat COVID rat G13 has a very good neutralizing antibody, 4 logs and above against itself, but not so good against the other virus. So this is the reason that our current vaccine is not working as good. So the strain-specific neutralizing antibody is one thing. The other is immune longevity. So this is a paper we published now quite a few months ago, is really to longitudinally measuring the neutralizing antibody of COVID-19 survivors, basically, patients. So we really, not surprisingly, but still scientifically very important to demonstrate that the same virus infect different patients, the immune response can be very, very different. First of all is on day 0. You look at the day 0 of the 5 different panels, obviously very, very different, right? The first group is negative. They never had a neutralizing antibody, even at a day 0, they are below the cutoff. And the second group is rapid waning. They had a high level of neutralizing antibody all the way to 80% above, but they rapidly decayed and waned. And then another group, similar high, but slower. And then the fourth group is we call almost persistent. The neutralizing antibody changes very little. And the fifth group, very small, only n equal to 3 or 4 patients. Somehow the neutralizing antibody was still increased, which we don't really understand. So the 3 panels in the middle are the majority. And you look at how long the neutralizing antibody will last after they recover from COVID-19. The shortest is 35 days, and the longest is 150 days, 48 days in that group. So average is 96. The slow waning group, double that. And then the persistent group is the most interesting. It can last from 1 year to 14,881 days. That's 39 years, I mean, that's the part, the people in the audience and the general public could really have to understand whether you're infected with COVID-19 or you're vaccinated against COVID-19, your immunity measured by neutralizing antibody can vary a lot. And we really could not, predict other than to say there's 2 trends. If your age is above 60, usually your immune response is not as good, so your neutralizing antibody is lower and waning fast. And then there's a slightly gender difference. The female, is stronger, performs better than male. So, but you cannot generalize this. That you really have to examine individually. Then I'm going to talk about the 2 countries, Israel versus South Africa, just to illustrate that the immunity is a highly complex, scenario, and we now talk about a lot of vaccine breakthrough infection or reinfection, and these 2 countries really illustrate that how important it is that we take it seriously. Israel was, regarded as the best vaccinated nation for several reasons. One is they went in very early, and the coverage was already 62% a few months ago, and they used just the mRNA vaccine. Okay, and was very good. They had a 94% efficacy. These are the phase 4 data, the real world data, protect against disease. But from June, to July, they suddenly dropped by 30%. And then They further dropped to 47%, and the government basically intervened by giving the third boost, and now they're coming back to high level of protection. So this just demonstrates that the vaccine breakthrough infection for even a country like Israel can happen due to two reasons. One is the waning of the immunity, and secondly is the introduction of the Delta. South Africa is another interesting story. So these are basically natural infection, and the country was unfortunately had 3 waves and with 3 different viruses. Wave 1 was the original virus with we call the D614G virus, and this was followed by the Beta. So the South Africa was the birthplace of the variant Beta, but now the country is completely really taken over by Delta. So then you will ask how the immunity look like. Is the Beta better protected against the Delta than the original people who infected with D614G? It's not. The virus evolution is not linear, it's random. So the immunity right now is that the original virus gives you let's say the neutralizing antibody from 614G neutralize the Beta and the Delta with similar efficiency, but neutralize itself the best. But people recover from Beta, neutralize 614G better than Delta, and Delta, people infected with Delta have the neutralizing antibody better than 614G, better than 614G than Delta Beta. So what that says is that for vaccine development, we are always in a catching up game. The virus is smarter, it evolves ahead of time. So in terms of booster shot, initially we thought if we have a Beta would be good, but it's not, because Beta is even worse than our current vaccine in protect against Delta. Okay, so what we're doing is quantitative boosting. So regardless of which vaccine you use, this is a highly complex, the diagram from a preprint, but I just want to emphasize that first of all, is that no matter which level of neutralizing antibody you have, you're always going to face the issue of against the original virus and then alpha virus, Delta and the Beta, the neutralizing antibody drops. And that's true even if you take a boost. The boost only raises the neutralizing antibody, but does not increase the breadth, okay? So even if your neutralizing antibody goes high, there's a difference always maintained that Beta is the hardest one to neutralize. That's why prompt scientists, and this John Cohn, who is a science reporter from the magazine of Science, published this paper basically to say the current vaccine is doing its job, but not good enough. We need a better vaccine, and he termed this as a dream vaccine. So what is a dream vaccine? Is basically what we're dealing with is a coronavirus, this is a family, we have Alpha, Beta, Delta, and Gamma. And then the SARS-1, SARS-2 are all in the sarbecovirus, the subgenus of Beta, and this use the ACE2 receptor. Okay, so SARS-3 will most likely be another sarbecovirus in that subgenus. And unfortunately, it will be in our region because our region is the hotspot for backbone viruses. A dream vaccine, I say, dream comes in different generations. The G is like from mobile days, now we have the 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, So I try to use that G to say, for coronavirus vaccine, we also have to have different generations. The first generation is the vaccine you and I have got against the original virus that first detected in Wuhan. The second generation vaccine is supposed to be the variant specific. But the South African experience told us that if we went there, the Alpha, if we had a vaccine against Alpha, it would still not be effective as against Delta. Even if you had the Beta vaccine, it would not be good against Delta. So most people said, why don't we make a Delta vaccine as a booster now? Yes, it would be good for Delta, but it will not be good for Mu, or if Beta comes back, we'll still be in trouble. So that's why my lab, we try to work on a third generation vaccine, which focus the sarbecovirus. And then beyond that, you can go to all the Beta virus fourth generation, or the coronavirus, which is the fifth generation. So I'm going to just very quickly present the data that we recently discovered and published in New England Journal of Medicine. So what we have evidence now is a quantitative plus qualitative boosting. So that was discovered in the SARS survivors. Remember the SARS survivors, even last February, I was interested in their serum to see if they cross-neutralized SARS-CoV-2, and they didn't. And then early this year, this cohort were eligible for a vaccine, use the Pfizer vaccine. So now we have the data, use the multiplex neutralization test. So the first cohort is a SARS patient who survived. Second cohort is COVID-19 patients survived. Third in the middle is people like you and me. We were not infected, but we had a vaccine. Fourth is COVID-19 patients survived and vaccinated. Last on the right is the SARS patients survived and vaccinated. As you can see, when we do multiplex neutralization test, the first cohort only neutralized SARS-1, the second cohort only neutralized SARS-2, and then when you are infected and vaccinated for COVID-19, your neutralizing antibody goes up, but qualitatively there's still a big difference because you don't neutralize SARS-1 as good. Only the SARS-1 survivors, when they vaccinated, then they get a uniform saturating neutralizing antibody against every one of the sarbecoviruses. So what's happening is this. In our immune sort of system, our body is very smart. They only produce enough antibody and a targeted immunodominant region. That's the most important parts of the virus. And for SARS virus, that's the receptor binding domain. And they even zoom into the residues which make direct interaction with the ACE2 receptor. For that reason, SARS-1 and SARS-2 differs by 20% amino acid sequence. That's why the immune response is so specific, as I already said, right? That the coronavirus neutralizing antibodies are virus and strain specific. So even if you get a boost, for SARS-CoV-2, what you are getting is the immunodominant epitope, illustrated by the triangle. For the SARS-1, the immunodominant epitope is the circle. But the broad neutralizing epitope, we know it exists, and I, present it as a cross for cross-neutralization. But they are not immunodominant if you are infected with SARS-1 or vaccinated with SARS-2. So we find that cross-clade boosting, basically SARS-1 patient vaccinated with SARS-2, you force the immune system to go after this cross-neutralizing epitope, make them basically immunodominant. So it's very exciting. Of course, we want to go to translate this into the pandemic preparedness for COVID-19 and future pandemics. But immediately there's two questions. These are beautiful data, but these are SARS-1 infected. So we cannot, do this strategy. We cannot infect the population by SARS-1 followed by vaccination. So the first question is, can we reproduce this kind of data by sequential vaccination without any infection? And then secondly is that, again, you and me are vaccinated by SARS-2 vaccine. By this time next year, 70% of the world population hopefully will be vaccinated by SARS-2 vaccine. So our idea will only work that if we can reproduce this by 2 vaccinations in reverse order, SARS-2 first by SARS-1. I don't have the time to run this, and plus we apply for patent, things like that. It's still commercially sensitive, but the answer to this question both are yes and a yes. So we have preclinical data to say that we can do that, vaccinate by SARS-2 as a priming, and then boost with a clade-1 SARS-1 vaccine. And what that achieves is a pan-sarbecovirus vaccine strategy. Pan-something virus vaccine strategy is a dream. We're still dreaming to have a pan-flu vaccine. This has been decades of research, and whoever gets it will get a Nobel Prize, I think. Dengue, very close to home. We want a pan-dengue vaccine. We still don't have it. We want a pan-coronavirus vaccine. I think we're still not there yet. But personally, I'm very happy to say that we're close to pan-sarbecovirus vaccine. And I have in the past developed a pan-henipavirus vaccine for Hendra and Nipah. So in Australia, when I was in Australia, we developed this vaccine against horses and using the equivalent of spike protein against the Hendra virus. And it turned out that it also worked on Nipah virus. So we already have a pan-henipavirus vaccine. So it is possible, but it depends on which virus and how you do it. So what we're now trying to achieve is a novel prime booster vaccine strategy to help not only to exit the current pandemic, but prevent the next one. And I believe will be a SARS-3 from another Sarbeco virus. So with that, I have to declare, my sort of conflict interest. I'm an inventor of the CPAS and now the vaccine, and we're also therapeutic, pan-Sarbeco therapeutic monoclonal antibodies. One thing is clear, right? For COVID-19, we have to work across the animal to human kind of space. So One Health is very important, and I'm very pleased to announce that we have won the bid to host the 7th World One Health Congress in Singapore, November next year, and I hope all of you in the audience can come and enjoy the meeting. And thanks a lot to my team and all the collaborators, DXD Hub, of course, there. And I don't know if I can start this video. I don't think so. Yeah, that's all right. So I had a video that from the journal that have a good animation, but let's just stop this. Good enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Wang. Yeah, it was a very fascinating talk, as always. And so before we move to the question and answer panel discussion session, may I request the attendees to please submit questions if there are any. And I would like to say first that if we can't answer the questions during this webinar, we will attempt to follow them up subsequently by email. Let's see if we can share Prof. Wang's video. Yuanru.
Yeah, Yuanru, when you do the sharing, you have to click that share the audio as well. Otherwise, the audio will not come up yet. It's only 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, if you can share the video.
SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2 belong to the species SARS-related coronavirus and the subgenus Sarbecovirus, but are in 2 distinct phylogenetic clades. Emerging SARS-CoV-2 variants pose a challenge to the effectiveness of current vaccines. A vaccine capable of controlling current SARS-CoV-2 variants of concern, as well as preventing infection by other Sarbecoviruses, would be optimal. To investigate the possibility of cross-clade boosting of neutralizing antibodies against Sarbecoviruses, investigators obtained serum specimens from 8 long-term survivors of SARS-CoV-1 infection who had received the Pfizer-BioNTech mRNA SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. Surrogate virus neutralization tests were performed to analyze the specimens for neutralizing antibodies against 10 different Sarbecoviruses, 7 from the SARS-CoV-2 clade and 3 from the SARS-CoV-1 clade, including variants that affect only animals. The authors examined 5 serum panels consisting of specimens from unvaccinated SARS-CoV-1 infection survivors, unvaccinated patients with SARS-CoV-2 infection, healthy vaccinated persons, vaccinated survivors of SARS-CoV-2 infection, and vaccinated survivors of SARS-CoV-1 infection. All vaccinated survivors of SARS-CoV-1 infection had high levels of neutralizing antibodies against both SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2, including several variants of concern. These patients were also the only group with a broad spectrum of neutralizing antibodies against all 10 Sarbecoviruses, including bat and pangolin viruses with the potential to cause human infection. In this study, high levels of neutralizing antibodies against a broad range of Sarbecoviruses, including both SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2, were detected in survivors of SARS-CoV-1 infection who were immunized with a SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccine. Further study is required to see whether other combinations of antigenic stimulation from different Sarbecoviruses might be able to elicit broad immunity to the entire subgenus. Full study results are available at nejm.org.
Thank you, Yuanru. Yeah, I mean, so we're very fortunate, not only get the high impact paper, but the journal decided to spend a lot of effort to make animation for our paper. They only select a few papers a year to do that. So we're very, very honored. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Wang. Okay, we can proceed now to the Q&A discussion, the panel discussion. We have until about 10:55 local time. That's about half an hour or 35 minutes. So sort of to start the ball rolling, right? We will have all the different panelists take 3 questions first, very generic questions, with regards to the local situation in their country. So there will be 3 questions that we asked to all the panelists. So the questions are: what progress has been made at the vaccination front in your country? Which vaccines are used in your country? And are there breakthrough infections in your country, and how frequently do they occur? So we begin with Dr. Christine first from the Philippines. Dr. Christine.
Thank you, Bennett. Thank you, Ben. So for the Philippines, I'd like to give a brief situationer on the progress that has been made for the vaccination front. Basically, since late last year, government has the National Vaccine Deployment Plan, which brought together all the national agencies, the local government counterparts, as well as partners in the private sectors and civil society to basically have this action plan for the vaccine deployment all over the country. Now, the Philippine government does recognize that herd immunity is kind of multifactorial, but that vaccination is one of the major factors in protecting the community by reducing transmission and the possibility of severe cases. So as of the moment, recent data shows that we have already vaccinated about more than 22 million of the population completed the second dose and single dose vaccines, with an additional 4 million having undergone the first vaccination also. So that's about 20% of the population. It's the basic challenges of the country in the deployment of vaccines is that, number one, because of basically, I'm sure this is across all of the nations, there's a very limited global supply of vaccines, and that only a subset of this is available to resource-limited countries such as the Philippines. Number two, we have, of course, vaccine hesitancy. We have pockets of that in the country, but of course, we're also addressing that with information campaigns and the active immunization program, which also includes a communication campaign. Also, we have the Philippine topography. Basically, the archipelago is not helping with the efforts because the deployment isn't that fast in reaching other regions. So basically, most of the vaccination activities have been centered in the NCR. It's projected that at the middle of October, we'd be about 70% vaccinated in the NCR, but that's not the picture in most of the regions in the country, unfortunately. Other challenges are the logistics of it all. Basically, the resources, human, economic, so that's also a challenge for us. So basically, that's it. And then for the question on which vaccines are used in the country, all right, so government has been because of the first limitation, we've had a lot of challenges in getting vaccines, and so that basically most of the WHO approved vaccines are being deployed in the country, but for the first year, the first phase of individuals who received the vaccine, basically we've received the Sinovac and the AstraZeneca mostly for the frontliners, the senior citizens, the A1 population. But for the rest of the population, it's basically a mix of everything else. And then the last question, okay, so the last question as to, are there breakthrough infections in the country and how frequent does this, unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of surveillance activity to monitor the breakthrough infections, but we have case reports, and there are several unpublished studies stating this, that we have had breakthrough infections after the first natural infection and also after completing the 2 doses of the vaccination. So basically, that's it. That's a brief summary of the Philippine situation. Over to you, Ben. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Next, we have Dr. Safarina from Indonesia.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah. Thank you, Ben. The first question is regarding what progress has been made at the vaccination front in your countries. So Indonesia is a wide country, island nations, and I should say that it's not easy to distribute and deploy a vaccine all over Indonesia. But at that moment, we already reached about 20% of the vaccination. About more than 54 million people has got fully vaccinated, but that's mostly in the big cities, in Java Island mostly. And altogether, fully vaccinated and first dose were 150 million doses. Of course, like Christine has mentioned, that there are also obstacles that the government has to face, such as the vaccine hesitancy and also a shortage of the manpower. But we are working on it to be able to reach the remote area and to get equally vaccinated for people living in other islands or in the small islands. And regarding the second question is that which vaccines are used in Indonesia? It's actually the first one that has been retrieved by the government is the Sinovac, and then the Sinopharm. So most of the people in Indonesia has got vaccinated, but especially the healthcare worker, they've got first and second dose of vaccination with Sinovac. But then AstraZeneca is also available, those two, and then later on we also get Moderna and Pfizer. But because of the, I will go through the third questions because it's related to the second one. Because of the breakthrough vaccination that is happening among the healthcare workers, then the government decided to have a booster with Moderna. So the third vaccination is now using Moderna for the healthcare workers. Of course, during the wave, the peak of the Delta variant wave, when we reached 50,000 cases, positive cases per day in July, most of the variants or the lineage of the virus is the Delta variant. So the government thought that because of the healthcare workers got infected and some of them pass away as well, that's why it was given the Moderna. But now the cases is going down really, really low. Hopefully it will not get up again. It will not reach another new peak because it's a combination of vaccination coverage and also the government applied the restrictions as well. And also another interesting thing is that we haven't done a thorough sero-survey because there are lots of in Indonesia, not only vaccination play a role, but also undetected asymptomatic infection also seems to protect the population somehow. So we need to do that as well, Prof. Wang, not only response to vaccination, but also natural undetected asymptomatic infection. I think that's all from me, Ben. Thank you.
Thanks, Safarina. Next, we have Dr. Watsamon to tell us about the situation in Thailand.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to show the data from Thailand. For the first question, the progress of vaccination in Thailand, we start vaccination since 28 February this year, and currently around nearly 50% of population have got the first dose. It's around 33 million people, and around 30% of them got second dose. And because we start with the Sinovac first, and after 3 or 4 months, we receive the data that the immunity quite decay. So we start to booster the third dose in this group. So around 2% of them got the third dose. And the coverage of vaccine mostly in the dark red zone. In Thailand, we separate the area in the color zone. Yeah, the dark red zone is such as a Bangkok and surrounding area, and include the tourist province like the Phuket. We have the coverage more than 50%. But in elderly group or high risk group, in that area, we coverage more than 70%. And we have the same problem with Indonesia and Philippines about the vaccine hesitancy. This month, we start to vaccinate in children group 12 to 18 years old in the school program. And as we know that we start with the Pfizer and we got the data about the side effect about myocarditis. So every parent quite concerned about this. And for the second question, which vaccine are used in my country? In my country, we have two supply system of vaccine. First is from government sector, and the second one is from private sector. For the government, the government provides Sinovac, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer. We start with the standard regimen with 2 doses of Sinovac. We priority in the people aged below 60 years old, as we got the data that Sinovac 2 doses of Sinovac is not good in elderly. So most of the people who got the Sinovac 2 doses is healthcare worker and maybe just general population. The second regimen is 2 doses of AstraZeneca, which we prioritize in the people who age more than 60 years old and in high risk group. And the third one is the 2 doses of Pfizer that we prioritize in children in the school-based program. However, after we start the 2 doses of Sinovac and got the data that there are quite low of immunity, we have the research that heterogeneous prime boost regimen is maybe good for to boost immunity. So now in general, we start the regimen with Sinovac first dose and the second dose with the AstraZeneca for general population. And we still correct the data about this regimen for the how long of immunity. But we have the data show that Sinovac first dose and AstraZeneca with the duration is allowed just only three weeks has high immunity as a 2 dose of AstraZeneca, which we need more than 12 weeks to have the high level of immunity. And for private sector, we got the Sinopharm and Moderna. However, Moderna is not just arrived yet, it's maybe next month. And about the third question about the breakthrough infection, actually we still not have the national level data, but we have the hospital-based data in King Chulalongkorn Memorial Hospital. Most breakthrough infection is occur in the person who incomplete course of vaccine, maybe just only 1 dose. However, in the rate of breakthrough infection in person who complete 2 doses, either Sinovac or AstraZeneca, is just only around 2%. And most of the cases is very mild. No one has a pneumonia who need the oxygen. So actually, I think the timing of breakthrough is a time that we have the peak in Bangkok too. Okay, this is data from Thailand. Thank you.
Thank you, Watsamon. Okay, next we have Prof. Chan Yok Fan from Malaysia.
Thank you, Benedict. Good morning, everyone. So I will reverse the question a bit. So to share about Malaysia, we actually to date have actually administered 45 million doses, and we use 4 vaccines. CanSino, only about 0.2% of the population has been vaccinated with CanSino. AstraZeneca, about 8%, and mainly our vaccines that we use are Sinovac and Pfizer. So about 50% actually are Pfizer. So what's the progress that in Malaysia so far? We actually have a total population of 26 million, which we can actually fully vaccinate. So to date, we have reached 64.3, and we expected that in 40 days, we will fully vaccinate this 26 million population. So at the moment, for population above 18 years old, which is about 23 million, we have fully vaccinated 89.1%, and we started that only actually in end February. And for adolescent, which is 12 to 17, we just recently started on 20th September, and this is probably about the third week. We have actually fully vaccinated about 5% of our adolescents. So I think we will reach 80% in 40 days. And about the breakthrough infection data, I will share with you actually a study from Ministry of Health. It's actually called Real World Evaluation of COVID-19 Vaccines under Malaysia National COVID-19 Immunization Program, and they call it RECO-WAM. So this study collected data from April 1st to September 12th for up to 14.5 million fully vaccinated people, and what they measure are two different indicators: one ICU rate and one death rates among these fully vaccinated. So what we found out was actually among ICU rate, it only stood about 0.0066%, and that it's about actually just 950 ICU admissions within the 14.5 million vaccine. And among the death rates, actually, same thing, we only have 0.01%, and that's about 1,004 deaths. And among the three main vaccines, Sinovac, Pfizer, and AZ, so all the vaccines were really effective, but we actually found that Sinovac has actually slightly higher admission rate as well as death rates. Thank you. Over to you, Benedict.
Thanks, Yofan. Next, we have Prof. Tan to tell us about the situation in Vietnam.
Thanks, Benedict. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be here today. So back to the first question, the vaccination progress. So Vietnam started to vaccinate the population in March this year. And since then has made very good progress. Up to now, over 50 million doses has been given, and the vaccination rates vary between provinces that somehow dependent or driven by the epidemic situation here in Vietnam. And in Ho Chi Minh City, where I live, in the adult population, almost everybody has received at least one dose, and the people who the proportion of individual who received 2 doses, I think, reached around 70%. So that is very good news. In terms of the type of vaccines that have been used, yeah, we started with AGs in March, and then the list increasing rapidly. Recently, we have a total of 8 vaccines has been approved for use, including vector-based mRNA vaccine and whole virus inactivated vaccines has been approved for use in Vietnam, which is, I think, very good, in terms of, in order to move forward with the vaccination strategy. Regarding the last question about breakthrough infections, the community level, we haven't had comprehensive data, but in the hospital where we live, 3 months ago, there's an outbreak within the healthcare worker who was fully vaccinated, and around 60 individuals was infected. Good news was, all of them had very mild disease or were asymptomatic infections. And that is something that Linh Pha mentioned during his talk. I think the good thing for the vaccine at the moment is they could prevent severe infections. And we also have evidence of, viral transmission between vaccinated individuals. So that said, I mean, on the always, the vaccine is effective in preventing severe infection. It remains important that we, stick to the control measure in order to reduce the transmission between individuals, especially between people who get the vaccine, and Joe who hasn't had the vaccine. I think that's all I could share today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tan. So now we will go back to Prof. Wang Linfa again to address more specific questions. So, Prof, in your title, you said, when will we achieve herd immunity? Right. So one of the questions that we have in the Q&A is, Singapore has achieved 83% vaccination. So have we achieved herd immunity? You're on mute.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a very good question. I already addressed in my talk is herd immunity against what, right? So the herd immunity basically is defined, the most narrowly is the herd immunity against transmission. So we have achieved, by definition, we are 83 in Singapore. So we have achieved the herd immunity against severe disease. So 83% people should be protected against severe and death. But unfortunately, there is a huge gap between protection against disease versus protection against transmission. And then our 83% vaccination, I don't know, if you dive into the data, 83% vaccinated, maybe 20 or 30% were vaccinated 6 months ago. Pfizer came out yesterday clearly that 6 months, that, even with Pfizer kind of vaccine, 6 months later, your protection dropped to 47%. Okay, so then 83% vaccinated, and how many percentage of this already 6 months, and then you take a discount of that, then let's say 30% already reach 6 months, and then half of them are no longer protected against transmission. So your 83% already you have to take off 15% to 20%. So you're now the herd immunity. Even if we really calculate it on the back of the envelope to say the herd immunity in Singapore at most is 60%, not 83%. Okay, so that's the challenge we have.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Prof. Wang. Another question for you before I go on to the rest of the panel again, right? Is we had a question about the vaccine just pushing down individuals down the risk curve from 70-year-old to 50-year-old. Right? So can I get your thoughts about this? Yeah. So the question basically to say that there's an age-dependent factor, and when you get older, that your vaccine is not as effective, which is true. Our data shows that. So the audience, the person asked the question says, you're just basically vaccinated. A 70-year-old has the same risk as a 50-year-old who is not vaccinated. I disagree, because you're talking about infection, yes, but if you're talking about disease severity, then still a 50-year-old without vaccine still have a high chance of dying than a 70-year-old to get a vaccine. So I think, again, I keep reminding everybody, scientists, myself included, and the audience, what's your major concern, right? As an individual, your major concern is death and severe disease. So please go get a vaccination. But as a community, I always say, do you vaccinate for yourself or for the community? I think we're doing for both, especially for the younger people that, you're doing more for the community, the older people, you're doing more for yourself, but everybody is doing for both, So please remember that you're vaccinated, doing vaccination not only for yourself, but contribute to the community, yeah. Okay, yeah, thanks, Prof. Okay, now we go back again to the rest of the panelists, right? So we have had a question about, how do we explain breakthrough infections among vaccinated persons, whether it is humoral response, whether it's cellular response, and also about the relative strengths of different vaccines. So can I direct this again to all the panelists, again beginning with Dr. Christine, and maybe frame it very broadly, right? Because I know that we are all part of a serosurveillance study. So is serosurveillance or serological testing, neutralization antibody testing, is it influencing government policy in your country? So can we start with Dr. Christine, please?
Hi, thank you, Ben. Okay, so as for the nationwide serosurveillance, we haven't, we're only starting with that right now, and several laboratories have been doing antibody testing, but a consolidated data regarding that isn't that centralized yet as of now. But we are working on this project, and potentially it has it's going to impact policy. As you know, RITM is working closely with government, and also the OST is also working closely with the government in making policy briefs regarding this. So we're hoping that with the completion of our study, then yes, potentially it's going to create a lot of policy briefs with regards to the control of this pandemic.
Okay, Ken. Any thanks, Christine. Any thoughts about relative efficacy of the vaccines? What you've seen so far? Yeah, that was one of the questions, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so as with regards to that, I can only tell you about the case reports that we've been having here, because we have been seeing reinfections after natural infection months before. So the earliest that I've encountered is like 4 months. According to studies, published studies, natural immunity could potentially last until 8 months. And for vaccines, it's kind of like 6 months that, that antibodies last. But of course, as with regards to T-cell immunity, we haven't, well, this is it's a difficulty, and there's difficulty in detecting T-cell immunity, right? So basically that's it. So there's breakthrough infections after infection and vaccination for us, yes.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Severina, please.
Oh, thank you, Ben. Regarding the serosurvey, there are several serosurveys conducted in Indonesia, but not nationally. For example, I'm only talking about that. What have we done at the Eijkman Institute? So we did some serosurvey in October to December 2020. We were working together at that time with CDC, and also in March. The October to December was done in Bali, and the one in March 2021 was done in Jakarta. So the one in Bali is 2,600, about that. The sample size is 2,693, and in Jakarta is 4,919. It's a cross-sectional, so it's not that it doesn't have a time point. So at that time, in December, in October to December, we are measuring using the Luminex assay developed by a collaboration between CDC and Tetracore. So the sample collected is the blood spot. So at that time, Bali showed about 16.7% of seroconversion, but in Jakarta, that was 2020, right? So in March, Jakarta, it is more interesting that we found about 44.5%. Although the positive case detected by PCR is only about 8%. So that's why I mentioned earlier that there are plenty of asymptomatic undetected infection around the population. So the next one, which is going to be working together with the Ministry of Home Affairs, it's not a really national one, but we are going to do the serosurvey in 9 what you call the agglomeration regions, the busiest area that has the highest positive cases in Indonesia. That is going to be conducted this month. Hopefully, it will start in the 4th week of October. And also the Ministry of Health is going to do the rest outside these 9 agglomeration regions. They are going to do the other part of Indonesia, because it's a white country and island nations. It's not easy to handle samples. So hopefully by the end of this year, or probably early 2020, we will be able to see at least a capture of the picture of the condition reaching at the end of the year, regardless of the vaccination or infection. But of course, those data will be taken as well. I think that's regarding the serosurvey.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Severina. In the interest of time, we have to move on to the other panelists. I apologize. Next, someone please. Yeah.
Yes, for the question, I think, yes, of course, I think serosurveillance is quite important. Like I mentioned, as a COVID is quite new about the COVID vaccine, and I think the data about the vaccine is dynamic and change. As I mentioned that in Thailand, after we start the 2 doses of Sinovac and we do the like the sero surveillance, actually in different centers in Thailand, we try to do about this, and we got the data together, and we found that the immunity is quite decay after that. So it's like the government and the specialists try to find a new way, like to do the heterogeneous prime boost regimen. And I think another step is quite challenge about that. We booster the people who got the 2 doses of Sinovac with AstraZeneca or Pfizer, and now we still don't have the data about this group of the people, when and how long of the immunity in this group. And for the next step, in the next year, if this group need to have the immunization, which regimen, which vaccine is best for them. So I think sero-surveillance is quite important and need to follow. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Watsamon. Next, we Yok Fan, please.
Yeah. So in regards to any seroprevalence study, I don't think there's a nationwide seroprevalence study for the last 2 years, but in University Malaya Medical Center, we have actually done 2 seroprevalence studies. One is last year and one it's up to April this year. So what we saw, it's in last year, just a few hundred serum samples, we found the rate can be up to 0.05% only, okay? And up to April, it changed to 3%, and it can go up to 10% in elderly. So that's what we see. We actually saw up to before introduction of Delta variants. So we do not actually have any studies right after Delta were introduced into our population, and that's also where our number of cases exploded as well. So I think in terms of using antibody or testing and so on, we actually in Malaysia, we take a very conservative approach. We actually do not recommend antibody testing for after vaccination, similar to FDA recommendations. So I think it remains a very hot topic in research, and hopefully, with this particular ASEAN COVID study, we could actually translate, research into policy.
Okay, thank you, Yofan. Tan, over to you, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like Malaysia, Vietnam don't recommend antibody testing after vaccination. And I think back to the serosurveillance, I think that is study is really difficult to do comprehensively in order to inform policymaker. Although we are doing that here in Vietnam, we haven't had produced any data, but we have a collection of serum bank from hospitals, like hospital patients across Vietnam since 2010. We're hoping to produce some data in the near future. But so Vietnam give infected people a window time of 6 months before they can get a vaccine. That said, I think the strategy is to get everybody vaccinated. That is, I think, independent with the antibody status. And then I think the first question is about the breakthrough infections. I think that is really important, and we start to learn about the pandemic. There's a lot we know, but there's a lot we don't know. And remember that Linfa mentioned, the vaccine efficacy in protecting severe disease is 90–80%. But I mean, it's remain a challenge to protect or prevent the transmission or infections. That I mean, in part because the vaccine was designed to assess the efficacy in terms of preventing severe disease or symptomatic infection. So I think that's a lot we need to learn about, and we are facing with a very contagious variant, that is the Delta variant. That is a lot more contagious than the original strains, which is the one that the vaccine development was based on. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tan. Okay, and then we are nearing the end of the session already, so I will have 2 closing questions for Prof. Wang Linfa. The first one is from one of the audience attendees, is why the vaccine is not so good for preventing transmission versus severe disease. And the second question that is my own personal question interest to Prof. Wang is this notion about a pan-sabecovirus vaccine that is premised on the fact that we have conserved but non-immunodominant epitopes. But how correct are we in assuming that premise? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, the first question first is that why the vaccine is good in prevent severe disease and not so good in prevent against infection. As Tan already said, that in a pandemic, you always go for the aim number one is prevent death and severe disease. So all the vaccine in the early clinical trials all geared toward that. Secondly is that to prevent infection or transmission means that you have to have a vaccine not only induce immunity in your blood sort of systemic sort of circulation. What you want is where the virus exposed. We're talking about a respiratory infection. So you want mucosal immunity in your nose where the virus goes in to replicate. You want to have the immunity, the neutral antibody sitting there ready, IgA, So obviously that's a whole different, game in vaccine development. So I just attend a Gates Foundation, look into pan-coronal vaccines. And there's a lot of scientists argue that we should just develop a mucosal vaccine. But people like me to say, okay, if you have mucosal vaccine, and then if the mucosal part, the antibody wanes, the immunity wanes, then the virus will go to your systemic infection, then you get even worse. If you cannot prevent the infection by a mucosal vaccine, then you may lead to not only breakthrough infection but severe disease. So ideally, you want to have vaccine, have high neutral antibody, long lasting, in your nose, in your nasal cavity, in your stomach, everywhere, So I think it's clear, as Tan says, we're already doing well to prevent severe disease. It's just the Delta changed the dynamics, So that's your question about this pan-sabeco, our observations from SARS-1 patients. And we have evidence that cross-clade boosting, you can induce the broad spectrum neutral antibody become immunodominant. So your question is, what's the likelihood of succeeding, if you do vaccine followed by vaccine, right? And first of all, we have data already in mouse to say that's working. But more importantly, that's the thing about COVID-19, right? COVID-19, we already have more than 200,000 papers published in less than 2 years. The science is phenomenal. So if you read all the papers, people have done this work is that they generate random mutations in the RBD, what we call saturating mutagenesis. Every residue, 250 residues, every residue, they introduce the 19 changes. We have 20 amino acids, right? So one position, you can do 19 changes. So you get millions of variants. And then you can do a library, you can do a selection. What the conclusion is that there are what we call structurally constrained regions that you could not change, okay? We're doing our structural biology right now. I believe that we, hit the jackpot. Basically, we identify the broad neutralizing epitopes in this structurally constrained region. So hopefully that once we have that boosting strategy, that it will not only prevent the variants in the SARS-3, but the virus just could not change. Because if the virus escape these neutral antibodies, they will not be able to bind ACE2, and we don't worry. They don't infect human. Sounds like science fiction. We will see if it works, okay?
Well, thank you very much, Prof, for giving us the, the futuristic glimpse. Yeah. Okay, thanks. And with this, I bring the session to a close because we have reached the end. I hand it back to Dr. Sydney. Sydney, please.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you to the panelists for a very engaging discussion. And thank you to the attendees for your questions. We apologize we're not able to respond to all your questions, but please look up the website. We hope to be able to address some of them. We are recruiting participants to the ASEAN Serosurveillance Study. So please look up the study principal investigators in your respective country to participate. We're also continuing to engage more collaborators. Please connect with us on www.aseandx.com. Before we sign off on this episode, also let us know what else you would like to know or learn in the next episode by doing a survey on the link We'll keep the link on the screen. So this marks the end of this episode 3 of the ASEAN DX Preparedness webinar series. Until next time, please take good care, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yep.